chug, 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 chug.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Wizard Staff. I'm your host, Blake.
And I'm Guy.
And we are two drunk novices that like to talk about EDH. We like to drink and swear, so you have been warned. Please drink responsibly when you're playing children's card games. Today, we are talking about Magic's psychographs. First, let's talk, before we explain what a psychograph is, Guy, what are we drinking tonight?
Well, we're not drinking the same thing, Blake.
I tried, man. This is like a problem lately.
I don't know. I don't know why San Francisco has to be so difficult with me. I just can't find... I mean, is your beer specific to Washington or Oregon?
I'm actually looking at this for the first time. I didn't actually look that hard when I first looked at it. It doesn't say... It just says brewed from the US.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm drinking 805, which is meant to be a California-specific beer, apparently. It says it was born on California's Central Coast. Tastes fine. It's just kind of like your standard... I don't know, like... It doesn't feel cheap, but it doesn't also stand out among a lot of the other beers.
It's not Guinness.
It's not a Guinness. What are you drinking?
I also looked at the can more specifically. Apparently it's from Grand Rapids, Michigan. But I'm drinking Founders Solid Gold Premium Lager. It's pretty good. It's like a light beer. And I've finished the whole thing basically before we've even done this podcast.
Oh, excellent. I don't think I'm even like a third of the way through mine, so I'll catch up with you.
Alright, catch up, you slacker.
You
All right.
Start talking about psychographs. I'm gonna drink a lot more of this beer.
Alright, quick little disclaimer. Just kind of going into this episode, just remember that fun is subjective for EDH and all of Magic. Like, don't stereotype players and playstyles. It's really difficult sometimes because it's easy, but we're going to try not to do that this episode. Anyways, moving forward, what are psychographs? So, for anyone who doesn't know, psychographs is a qualitative methodology used to describe consumers on philosophical attributes. Psychographs have been applied to the study of personality, values, opinions, attitudes, interests, and lifestyles. In Magic, R&D uses 3 psychographs to identify their players. 3 psychographs were created by Magic R&D because, as a designer, they want to know what makes you happy when you play. So by creating these psychographs, their job gets a lot easier because they know how to cater towards you and what you want.
Yeah, as a product designer, this is a very similar concept that I studied while I was in school. And we would call them personas, but we would so to give an example, Karen is someone who likes to watch these kind of TV shows. This is her daily schedule, the things she likes to do. And then knowing these things, you can then create the ultimate experience for Karen by making sure it has all of her needs and hitting upon her pain points. I know that listening to Drive to Work, Mark has often talked about how it is sometimes difficult to make sure the whole set is evenly divided between these 3 personas, but they do their best to kind of make sure that there is a little something for everyone.
Is this like a class that you was one class you took through your whole art school career, or was this something that you did multiple times? No,
this was almost for every project. This is something that I would do. It's kind of the initial research. You go out, you survey and interview the people that you are designing for, and then you can create kind of these personas or psychographs. So to give maybe a more in-depth example, but I did a project for a hospital. We were supposed to be designing a new system for them to use so that they could take better care of their patients and track patient data. And so we talked to nurses, surgeons, doctors, patients, and so we were able to then bucket them and say okay, at this point in the process, Kyle the nurse is having these kind of problems, and here are the things that he needs. Karen, the doctor, has these problems, and then here's what she needs. You then project and like show, your client or whoever, these are who we identified, and it kind of just makes them, understand what you're doing, and it also gives them like an emotional kind of connection, and so then they can then say, yes, we do see these kinds of people. Or if you didn't hit the mark, maybe they can then say, oh, we don't think that's quite correct. Can you go back and maybe edit that or do a little more research? I think with Magic R&D, that's probably what they did, is they identified these 3 styles that we'll talk about and can now say, okay, here's how we can create the best experience for all of our players.
You sound very smart, by the way. I don't know anything about this subject. Yeah, so that's really interesting. So moving forward, each of these psychographs ended up being represented in a silver border card as a legendary creature. So theoretically, you can make an EDH deck using them as your commander, obviously if your playgroup allows it. This is where we're going to kind of, talk about each of them and describe each of them and our thoughts on them. So the first one we have is Timmy Tammy. For simplicity's sake, every time I say Timmy from here on out, just add Tammy to it. It's going to make things a lot easier. So, Timmy Power Gamer is a 2 and a green legendary creature human gamer. 1/1. And an activated ability of 4 mana, put a creature card from your hand into play. What is a Timmy? What does that even mean? So, these psychographs describe the different players of Magic. Timmys want to experience something. Timmy plays Magic because he enjoys the feeling he gets when he plays, the experience of it. What that feeling is will vary from Timmy to Timmy, but what all Timmys have in common is that they enjoy the visceral experience of playing. As you'll see, the other psychographic profiles, Johnny and Spike, have a destination in mind when playing, but Timmy is just along for the ride. He's there for the journey. And then another important note to make is there are different subdivisions of Timmy, like different variations. There's the power gamer, there's the social gamer, there's the diversity gamer, and the adrenaline gamer. And each of them are like slightly different versions of Timmy.
I think one of the stereotypes people often see or like think of when they hear Timmy as the psychograph is that Timmy is a brand new player, which isn't often the case. You could just like dragons and want to play dragons in Magic, and that's how you have fun. And so for them, Timmy, that's like their journey. And it's not so much about winning. I mean, winning is fun if they get to like, play their dragons and like win that way. But like, that's not like their main goal or objective.
Yeah, in my personal experience, when I talked to many of the Magic the Gathering players who've been playing for 20 plus years, they basically, a lot of them have said that they've kind of almost come full circle in the sense that like they started off as a Timmy, they became like more of a Johnny, and then they became more of a Spike, and then they kind of have circled back to being a Timmy, where they've kind of seen it all and they've chosen to just they've experienced like almost everything, so they're just really now back to just enjoying the experience of everything. I don't know if I explained that very well, but that's my explanation.
They go through like I don't want to say like the life of Magic, because it's not like they're done once they become a Spike. They start over almost. Yeah, I see what you're saying. From my personal experience, I definitely think that's along the similar routes of what I wanted to do. Like when I first wanted to play Magic, I was like, I just want to play dragons, and so I would have identified myself as a Timmy because I literally was just like, I want to win with big dragons and just do a lot of damage. And that was around the time the Dragon came out, so that kind of helped, start my addiction. Here's a interesting question for you, Blake, but do you think a majority of EDH players are Timmys or Tammys? Because Commander is very much like the social aspect of Magic. And so do you think a lot of people who are drawn to Commander are trying to experience that social aspect, therefore making them Timmy or Tammys?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, like, I mean, Commander is multiplayer, so it is inherently much more social than any other format by nature. So I would say that like Commander really does focus the Timmy players into Commander for the social experience. Yeah, I would say that, because most people who initially start, a vast majority are like looking for that social interaction that just doesn't exist in other formats or even other board games or card games.
Magic is a social game just in general, but Commander definitely is like the much more, not so much, it's much more social in the way that it's constructed as a format. So that was why I was thinking, like, is that part of the reason, or is that like a signal that, you know, Tammys come and play Commander? We'll get in more into this, but like, you know, Spikes who want to win like quickly, like turn 2, that's going to be a little hard for them to do in Commander, unless if you really are playing some of those like tier 1 like mega decks. But we'll get it more into that.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about the next profile?
Well, one more thing before we move on is, and so here's another question that I have for you, but because I was starting to make a list of commanders that, you know, you could bucket into the Timmy Tammy category, but then I was kind of thinking, is there really such like a very specific Timmy Tammy commander? Because you can build a deck however you kind of want to. Okay, like, all right, for example, Gitrog Monster, very powerful if built in the most fine-tuned way. But if I just like the Gitrog Monster and I want to play Frog Tribal, it's obviously not going to be a Spike build. It's going to be more of a Timmy Tammy build, because, you know, I want to win through frogs like hitting people. So do you think that there is such a thing as a very specific Timmy Tammy commander other than Timmy Power Gamer? Or do you think that it is more meant of like the playstyle of the deck that's built?
Well, I would almost argue that like deck building is much more of a Johnny trait that we'll get into later, but I think I kind of see the point that you're trying to make. And like, this is kind of like where it's difficult, you know, right? Because it's like you want to kind of think of like every Timmy as like the most casual of casuals. Generally, like, kind of true, but like once you get into like the nitty gritty, it's not necessarily true. I don't really know how to answer that question.
If you don't think there's like a solid answer, that's fine. I just wanted to bring up the thought experiment. So we'll move on to the second category, which is Johnny Jenny. So Johnny is represented in the uncard Johnny combo player. 2 blue legendary creature human gamer, 1/1, 4 generic mana. Search your library for a card and put that card into your hand. Then shuffle your library. Johnny wants to express himself. Johnny plays Magic because he wants his deck to be an expression and extension of himself. When the deck wins, he wins. When the deck is complimented, he's complimented. When the deck is trash talked, he's being trash talked. What sets Johnny apart from the other profiles is that Johnny enjoys deck building as much or more than he enjoys playing. And also, for a disclaimer, but we are taking these descriptions of the psychographs from the revisited article that Mark Rosewater wrote about these psychographs. So don't think that we're super smart and able to identify. I mean, we could maybe identify these ourselves, but they wouldn't be as fleshed out as what we're relaying to you guys.
Yeah, and honestly, like, we'll link the article that this episode is based off of. Also, listen to episode 9 of Drive to Work, where Mark Rosewater explains this. He's going to do a much better job than us.
He does a much better job, and he probably has like an episode where he goes into each of the different psychographs. I mean, he has almost 700 episodes at the time of recording this, so the man is non-stop. So the variations of Johnny Jenny are the combo players, the offbeat designers, deck artists, and Uber Johnnies. So Blake, I think you kind of want to talk about this a little, since you say that you identify yourself as a Johnny?
Yeah, so for the most part, I would say that I am a Johnny because I definitely everything that I read about this resonated with me because I definitely express myself through like my decks. Like I very much like hold my deck and like think this very much feels like an extension of myself. I put a lot of work into this deck, making it synergistic, and when it wins, it feels like I win. It feels very personal. Like I have emotional ties to very specific cards, like many players do. And this is kind of where I want to talk about like an issue I kind of have been running into as a Johnny player. Don't insult people's cards. And what do I mean by this? Well, like I've gone to LGSs like throughout, and you know, you like are meeting new people and you sit down and you start playing with them, and I've just had people sit down and like look at my commander and literally just be like, oh, that card is trash. And like I like take it personal because it's like I really like this commander. I really like the deck that I built for it. And for you to call it trash, you're calling me trash. And like that's not me being overly sensitive. It is, I am very much valid in my like disgust at your comment. It's like, also, and I know like I've kind of like called cards trash in like certain like of our reviews, but that's always like kind of been jokingly from like a specific power level analysis. I'm never like I'm never sitting down at an LGS like to a complete stranger being like, oh, your cards are trash, that card's trash. And like, what? Who the fuck does that, man? Have you run into that?
I personally haven't run into that. Well, I haven't run into that in like a serious manner. Like in our friend group, we definitely like call each other's cards trash all the time.
Oh yeah, that's the point I was gonna get to. Like, if you're with your friends, like almost like, well, that changes a lot of things. But it's like if you're with your friends, like, who gives a shit? Like, you're with your friends, you can like make fun of each other all you want. Like, you can just absolutely tear into each other and call each other's cards trash and whatever. But it's like you're friends. It's like, and you have trust in each other. This is a complete stranger who you've never met, and they're just calling your cards trash. And it's like literally fuck you. It's like, fuck off.
Have a lot of times where this has happened to you. Do you then just hard target them? Do you then win and kind of prove them wrong?
Yes, basically I hard target them, and like usually like before the game even starts, we like it's kind of my personal rule that I think like all EDH players should start doing, which is you sit down at a table. First question you ask is, what power level do we all want to play at? You all agree because you're probably all the same power level, and then I usually just hard target them and like that kill them usually. It's and I'm like not fully passive aggressive. Like I do that passive aggressively, but I'll also be like, hey man, don't like call my cards trash. And like they'll continue being a smart ass. I'm like, okay, you fucker, I'm fucking killing you. It's like, I don't know why you bother coming out here. So that's my little rant.
Okay, yeah, let's get a little bit back onto the topic. But maybe another question for you, or let me know if you kind of agree with this statement. But I believe based on the description of Johnny Jenny, almost any commander can be a Johnny commander, because what's important to Johnny is the individual cards themselves that are in the deck and not so much the commander. The commander is more like what enables what colors you're going to play, and you are probably picking your commander based on what you want to accomplish with your deck, whereas maybe a Timmy builds a deck based around the commander and then puts the cards that he or she likes because they like the creature and just want to have fun. Do you think that's a pretty accurate statement about like the differences in between how a Jenny builds a deck versus a Timmy Tammy building a deck around the commander because that's the card they like, and then they just throw whatever they want in it because that's what's fun to them, in the sense of these are the cards I like to play with? Whereas Jenny, they're picking cards that are what they want to accomplish in some kind of way. Like if they want to like do a 20 card mill combo, and then they just have to find like the commander to then enable those colors. Does that make sense?
I kind of got a little bit lost there. I did drink my entire beer. But I don't know, like, honestly, like, each of these psychographics is, like, so open-ended, like, because, like, all Johnnies want to do is express themselves, and that could take the form of just, like, being, like, a deck brewer who wants, like, a lot of synergy, or it could honestly just, like, expressing yourself, like, in the card, and, like, the cards that you choose to put in the deck could be something as simple as, like, Shared Tribal. Like, it's so open-ended, you can do just about anything. I don't know.
Well, I'll simplify it since you are drunk. Timmy Tammy builds a deck around the commander because they like that card. Johnny build the deck with cards in it, and then pick the commander because they want to play with those cards. Because those are the combos that they're trying to, like, accomplish.
If you're, like, specifically talking about the combo players within Johnny, yes.
Well,
I think that description works.
And then, I mean, I think that also kind of fits into the offbeat designers of Johnny Jenny, because they're trying to do something that, like, nobody's ever seen before with, you know, really, like, random and obscure cards in this, like, combo-esque kind of way.
Yeah, but you also see my point where it's like the deck artists of Johnny, where it's like they only care about, like, chairs being in the art.
Okay,
See, there's this wide variety. I don't know. I just don't think, like, nothing's ever simple. There's always a lot of.
Let's move on to the last psychographic.
All right, so we're gonna talk about Spike, and there is, for the silver border card, there is Spike Tournament Grinder. It is 2 and Black Phyrexian. It's a legendary creature, human gamer, 1/1, obviously. And then it has quadruple Black Phyrexian as an activated cost. Choose a card you own from outside the game that has been banned or restricted in a constructed format. Reveal that card and put it into your hand. So Spikes want to prove themselves, primarily to prove how good they are at something. So you will see Spike sees the game as a mental challenge by which they can demonstrate and define their abilities. Spike is great. Spike gets his greatest joy from winning because his motivation is using the game to show that he's what he's capable of, and then anything else in success is deemed as failure because that is the yardstick by which they're judging themselves. So pretty hardcore, as most people would call them. And then there's the variations of the innovators, the tuners, the analysts, and the nuts and bolts. And that's kind of the general idea of Spike.
Couple fun facts about Spike that I just want to go over real quick. But Spike was the first psychograph to be identified by Magic R&D, but was the last one to get a name. And Spike was given a gender-neutral name. And I'm not 100% sure on this, but my guess is since R&D identified Spike, or named Spike last, they identified this psychograph as a gender-neutral name so there wouldn't be too similar to how there's Johnny Jenny and Timmy Tammy. And Spike is represented as a female in the uncard, the legendary uncard.
I bet that's probably why. Like, they also, like, without Throne of Eldraine, they included Syr spelled S-Y-R.
Right.
Just, yeah, it's probably a smart choice. What do I have to say about Spikes? Well, like, the common belief is that this is where, like, all the CEDH players are at. Like, they're playing their highly optimized and tuned decks, where unless you win, you are a complete failure and you become really sad about your life. This is like more of the stereotype of Spike, because to give kind of a counterexample, you can be a Spike, but you could be like a Spike Vorthos, where like you prove yourself by being the very best at explaining Magic the Gathering lore. So there's like plenty of like YouTubers that are like really, like, I would argue, like, competing for that title, like of Spike Vorthos. There's quite a lot. Like, it's not necessarily just like CEDH players that are exclusively within the Spike psychograph. That's more of the stereotype. so I kind of want to like break that perception that a lot of people have, because I would say that, and Mark has said like people rarely fall within one of these three. People tend to be like a combination of the two. So I said earlier I was a Johnny, but I would also say like there's a little part of me that's a Spike, because I do want to like prove myself through like my knowledge of like especially enchantments. God, I'm just like a slut for enchantments. Like they're just like my favorite permanent, and like I understand them really well, arguably more than any other permanent type. And like I just feel like I have that shit on lockdown. What about you, Guy?
I don't think I'm a slut for anything but Guinness, but I would say that I am part Spike too. I do love winning, and I want to win, but I also
you do love winning.
But what I think holds me back is sometimes that part of me is Timmy. So I think it's interesting that you're probably like Spike Johnny and I'm Spike Timmy. But the part of me that's Timmy is just a little counterintuitive to like what Spike, the stereotype of just wanting to win, because some of the cards that I really enjoy playing with aren't always tier 1, but I want them to win. So like my mono white Avacyn deck, it's strong. Is it the strongest deck out there? No, but it's the deck I want to win with a lot because I really enjoy playing with Avacyn. Does that make sense?
I think so. Like, yeah, that is kind of like, it almost seems like a contradiction, because like Timmy's like looking more for the destination, whereas Timmy is much more about the journey and Spike is much more about the destination of winning. So they do kind of seem a little bit counterintuitive, but I don't remember off the top of my head because I'm a little bit drunk, that they can exist, that there is an overlap between the two.
Yeah, there is a overlap of all these in some degree. We're not going to get like super into that just because I feel like you could
It gets complicated really fast.
It gets complicated really fast.
And we're big dummies.
We are big dumb novices. Before I ask you a question, I do want to point something out which I thought was also kind of funny. But the Spike uncard, the legendary Spike card, I don't think it'd do you too much good in EDH, since you can't grab a banned card from EDH to play with, since it's technically not a constructed format. So if you did go grab a banned card from Modern, it's probably already going to be a card that you can use in EDH, and it might not even be that strong of a card. You know what I mean?
Faithless looting. Actually, you can't even do that. Can you? Because it's mono black commander.
Well, if you're using Spike as your commander, yeah, that would be tough to then use Faithless Looting. The Spike's ability, choose a card you own from outside of the game, so it's a wish ability. So it's already kind of breaking the rules, but if you're using an uncard as your commander, then I already feel like, why not have a wish ability? So choose a card you own from outside of the game that has banned or restricted in a constructed format, reveal that card and put it into your hand. So I guess you could use, there is, some, I guess is Black Lotus banned and restricted?
Buy a real one, find out.
I guess. Yeah, that is, you do have to own the card, so it's not like you can make a proxy, because then it's not like owning the card. The uncards, as we just learned from our My Little Pony episode that we did last week,
oh my god,
can be like a little confusing.
A lot confusing.
Yes, a lot confusing. Okay, but so the question I had for you, because I was thinking about this, but like, what do you think the difference is between a Johnny and Jenny combo versus a Spike combo? Is it just Johnny and Jenny is trying to do something unique and different, where Spike is just doing a combo that's like meant to be, almost a guaranteed win? Like, what is it? Power Artifact, Assault Monolith, Grim Monolith, and then like any kind of like draw spell or Walking Ballista. Whereas maybe Johnny and Jenny is trying to create infinite mana using 7 cards and then playing Walking Ballista. Or do you think Johnny and Jenny is still the Power Artifact, Grim Monolith kind of combo too?
Man, I don't... See, like they just kind of like start to bleed together once you just think about them for like too long. Like I think like you like the oversimplified answer is like, oh, spikes are a bit more of tryhards with like fully optimized decks, that the combos are like much more consistent to get, whereas like the Johnny combo decks are a little bit less consistent. But I don't know if I'm like falling within the stereotype, and I'm just questioning everything about life right now, and I'm just like, oh god. Having a midlife crisis.
I still haven't finished my beer quite yet, so I'm not
Get
quite
on my
at your
level.
But we'll be wrapping up this relatively soon. But okay. Yeah, it was just kind of like a thought I had is maybe I was also still going off the stereotype of Johnny Gemini is just about like combos in a way that, you know, wants you to win the game. The combos could also just accomplish something very minute, you know? They don't have to necessarily be like their win condition. They could just be like 7-card combo, I'll draw a card.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd also argue that like the combo decks, whether you're like Spike or Johnny, it's like there's personal stakes, but different personal stakes. One is like if you don't win that game, you feel like a failure, and then if you the other is like if you don't win, you kind of feel like you might still have gotten the sense that you got to express yourself through your cards, even though you lost. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's different things for different people.
Okay. We wrote down the tier 1 commanders that are meant that we were like, oh, okay, here's maybe one more question. But do you think that... So we kind of talked about how Timmy builds his decks around the commander because he likes the commander. He or she likes the commander and wants to build the deck with cards that he or she likes. Whereas Johnny and Jenny is building the deck around cards that they want to use to like express themselves, and then picks the commander. Do you think that there is like some sort of like mix, or like how do you think Spike goes about building their decks? Like, do you think that they're just trying to look at one of these 10 commanders to, you know, build the most optimal deck, or what do you think their process is?
Well, it seems to be like a little bit of from both sides when you're like playing CDH. Like from what I know, it's like, okay, a new commander is released based on knowledge of other decks and CDH decks and how they win. Can the color identity of this new commander bring into it like the existing engines of those cards? So like I think a good example would be a good example to kind of express my point is there was fairly recently the 5-color Niv Mizzet, which could run the food chain engine to win by playing a lot of like multicolored spells, and then almost so the commander came out and they realized, oh, this engine that already exists and we know is like CDH viable can be put in this deck, and it, like all of the food chain decks like General Tazri are now like fall to the wayside because this is like the new best one. And then like immediately after that, the first sliver came out, which is 5 colors and is just a better 5-color Niv Mizzet. So Niv Mizzet like had its like time in the sun and like immediately fell off, and that will look like kind of continue. Like I think the engines kind of take priority over like the commander, because like General Tazri like has been like the food chain commander for years, and then it got replaced by Niv Mizzet, and now it's been replaced by the first sliver, and who knows, like maybe in another couple of years the first sliver will be replaced by another 5-color commander that does the job even better. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, I guess I didn't realize that the first sliver was meant to replace Niv Mizzet as that food chain-esque combo, because I guess you're right, General Tazri is no longer on this tier 1 list. But I was just like, oh, the first sliver is meant to be a really strong sliver deck because you can pretty much play a couple slivers on your turn and then cascade all of them out and then win that way. But I didn't even think about trying to run the food chain combo, which, damn, okay. But yes, I do agree with your like line of thinking for, you know, the engine takes priority of the commander for a spike, but then you could still go the way of a Timmy Tammy by picking one of these like slightly suboptimal, like maybe if you didn't want to build the first sliver and you wanted to use Niv Mizzet because you really liked Niv Mizzet, you could still build a pretty optimal food chain deck. It just wouldn't be the now considered tier 1 engine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's all about your motives of building a deck. Are you doing it to like prove yourself? Are you doing it to just experience social interaction? Are you doing it to express yourself? And that's really what it all comes down to.
And it can kind of be a combo of both in a way.
Yes, it
too.
can. It can mesh, and usually does. And that's again why this is complicated. Like a lot of life, nothing's one box or 3 boxes. It's like a whole bunch.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're gonna end this episode with a short discussion. One of the quotes I was reading in Mark's article, I think, kind of struck a chord, and I think it just kind of lends itself to a much larger message. But so the quote: "One of the great myths about Timmy is that he is young and inexperienced. I think this comes from the fact that a non-Timmy, particularly a Spike, looking at a Timmy play reads those choices as those of inexperience. Why else would he play overcosted fatties or coin flipping cards, or cards that simply put aren't good?" So it's an interesting point that Mark brings up, and just emphasizes that fun varies from player to player. What is fun to Tammy may not be fun for what Spikes think are the most optimal. Personally, I've never seen any kind of upfront attitude towards other players about them like shitting on wanting to play a certain commander or include a certain card, except for when Blake talked trash about my mono white pet cards. I mean,
love you.
And I also want to speak about this in person because when you get on like Facebook, it's kind of hard sometimes being in some of these EDH groups because you just read a ton of negative stuff that, you know, it doesn't make you feel great about, you know, some of the other people in the community. Yeah. So it is just important to keep in mind that someone else may be playing Magic for a different reason than you, and that's okay. What's most important is communication. Big shocker. So you can create an environment that is best for all players. Sometimes that won't always be the case, but you can avoid that dilemma with communication, or sometimes that won't always be the case, but when you can avoid dilemma, it may be best that you do.
Yeah, like I just want to give like a personal anecdote, which is like I'll often be online and I'll be looking through commanders that I have built that I have like, they're not like the strongest like CDH decks, they're just like mid power level, and I try to optimize them as much as possible, and I'll catch myself making the mistake of going in, seeing someone's deck, and I'm like, why aren't they running this card? Why aren't they running that card? This deck's terrible. And then I need to like sometimes like remind myself, you know, this person's just playing like Angel and Centaurs because they want to. Like, I can't really like fault them for that. That's what they want to do. That's what they find fun. I'm in the wrong. I need to take a step back and take a chill pill. But then like there are the times where it's people are building decks with the same mindset as me, and that's when it's okay to be like, why maybe run this card instead of this slightly suboptimal card. You just really have to consider like what the goals of each person is, because oftentimes they're different. That's the stuff you notice, and like that's fine. Like you need to know when to critique people when they're the same like psychograph as you, and if they're not the same psychograph as you, like let them be. You don't need to enforce your psychograph on them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And even when you're trying to give back that criticism, they're trying to build the most optimal version of their deck, and they're asking for criticism. You still need to approach it in that constructive way. That's
like, hey, have you considered this card? And then they might be like, yeah, I have, but this is why I didn't include it. Instead of going in all accusatory, like, what are you doing? Like, obviously this is better than this. If you just come in aggressive, like, no one's gonna want to talk to you. What are you doing?
Yeah, then that's just kind of good life advice in general too.
Yeah, honestly, Magic preparing you for the rest of life.
Yes, everyone should play Magic so that they can, learn how to treat people.
Hopefully.
Yes. All right, want to end the episode, Blake?
Yeah. Well, thank you all for listening. I hope we did more help than harm with this episode. We may have made a few mistakes, but we tried not to. I had fun. I'm very drunk. I have work in the next morning, so I'm gonna go.
Me too.
Yes. You can find us at Twitter and on YouTube. We'll have links in the description. We hope you all have a nice night. Peace out.